I'm a driving instructor and have been teaching people to drive in Great Britain for over 16 years. And now I'm going to ask ChatGPT some questions to see how much it knows about driving in Great Britain, but mostly the driving test in Great Britain. I'm not going to make it easy though. I'm going to ask it the questions that many people tend to get wrong, including some driving instructors. So here we go. She switched on. Can you hear me, ChatGPT?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. Everything seems to be working great. Let me know what you need.
Okay, well I want to ask you some questions about driving in Great Britain, but mostly about the driving test to test your knowledge.
That sounds like a fun challenge. I'm ready for it, so go ahead and hit me with your questions whenever you're ready.
Okie dokie. So the first one is it illegal to overtake on the left, also known as undertaking, on dual carriageways?
That's a great question. In the UK, it's generally discouraged to overtake on the left on dual carriageways, but it isn't always illegal. It's allowed if the vehicle in the right lane is moving slower than you, or if you're in a queue and you're just moving past on the left. So it does depend on the situation.
How slow does the traffic have to be moving before you are allowed to pass on the left?
In general, the traffic in the right lane has to be moving significantly slower than the traffic in the left lane, usually around 10 miles per hour or more difference. So if the vehicle in the right lane is going much slower, then it's generally acceptable to overtake on the left. It's always good to stay safe and aware though.
I'm just going to stop her there because she is suggesting that it's okay to undertake if there is a speed difference between lane 1 and lane 2, when of course you would need a speed difference to be able to undertake. She's answered that question poorly, or she's misinterpreted my question. My question was, how slow does the traffic need to be before you can undertake? At least that's what I thought I asked. Maybe I'll try again. How slow does the traffic need to be going before it's acceptable to pass on the left?
So generally, if the traffic in the right lane is moving about 10 miles per hour slower than the traffic in the left lane, that's usually the threshold where it's considered acceptable to pass on the left. Of course, always best to stay safe and follow the rules of the road.
So she's got that wrong. She's saying as long as you're going 10 miles an hour faster than the right lane, you can pass on the left. That's not true. And there is actually no set speed where passing on the left is okay. What I mean by that is, say you can't go, oh, the traffic's moving at 60 miles an hour, now it's okay to pass on the left, or the traffic's moving at 50 miles an hour, now it's okay to pass on the left. If you get into trouble for passing on the left, it won't be because of a set speed, it will be because of how you are driving. It would have to be proved that you were driving in a careless manner. Undertaking in itself is not illegal, but depending on how you do it, it can be considered careless, and therefore you can get a fixed penalty or go to court. If you want more information on passing on the left or undertaking, then I'll leave a link to a video up there. But generally, if you move from a right lane to a left lane to then perform the overtake, the pass, that is likely going to be considered undertaking and much more likely going to be considered careless. Now for the next question, let's turn her back on. Do you need to keep both hands on the steering wheel as much as possible to pass the driving test?
Yes, absolutely. Keeping both hands on the steering wheel is definitely one of the key points in the driving test. It helps you maintain full control of the vehicle and shows that you're in full command. So definitely a good habit to keep.
But if you were to only use one hand during the driving test on the steering wheel, would that automatically be a fail?
It wouldn't necessarily be an automatic fail, but it would definitely lose you some points. The examiner really prefers that you keep both hands on the wheel as much as possible for safety and control, so it's definitely a good idea to keep both hands on the wheel.
How long can you drive with only one hand on the wheel before you would fail the driving test?
It's really more about the overall impression and the examiner's perception. If you do it just for a very brief moment, it might be a minor fault. But if it happens frequently or affects your control, then it could lead to a serious fault. So just best to keep both hands on the wheel as much as possible.
So I'll stop her there again. She's not too far wrong here. You should have both hands on the wheel most of the time, but driving with one hand in itself is unlikely to be a fail. Element 2.2.4 sets out how you should control the car in regards to steering. Element 2.2.4 of the driving standards. I should have mentioned that bit, sorry. And that doesn't mention anything about having to keep both hands on the wheel, although rule 160 in the highway code, which is a very long rule, does include in that rule keep both hands on the wheel. I don't remember the exact wording, but it is a should rule, which means it's not a legal requirement, but it's something that you should do. If a driving examiner is going to fail you for steering, it should be because they feel you don't have good enough control over the vehicle. It should not be because of your technique of how you use the steering wheel. However, this technique, yeah, that's not good enough. And, you know, just using your finger or just your finger and your thumb probably wouldn't be considered good enough control over the vehicle. You do need at least one hand properly on the steering wheel for you to have good control of the car. Now for the next one. If you hit the curb during the driving test, is that an automatic fail?
Hitting the curb during the driving test can be a serious fault, and it can indeed lead to a fail, especially if it affects the safety of the vehicle or other road users. So it's definitely something to be cautious about and try to avoid.
If you were to hit the curb during the driving test, could you still pass?
It is possible to still pass if you just lightly touch the curb and it doesn't cause any safety issues or doesn't affect the control of the car. But if it's a more significant contact, then it could definitely lead to a serious fault. So it's always best to be careful with that curb.
Okay, she is pretty much right about that one. Yes, you can fail for hitting the curb, but hitting it, or I shouldn't even say hitting it, that's not the right word. Touching it gently, just brushing it ever so slightly, won't necessarily be a fail. For you to fail the driving test, you need to be either unsafe or illegal. So if the examiner felt, okay, you touched the curb gently, but overall it was still safe, then it may just be a driving fault, not a serious driving fault. And you don't fail for a single driving fault. It has to be serious or dangerous to fail, but you can fail for multiple driving faults, particularly if they're in the same area. So if you were to brush the curb gently, well, you may just get a small fault for that one, but if you were to do it again, well, they may turn that into a serious fault because you've done it twice. Sometimes they let it go more than twice. It depends how badly you do something. Not just about touching the curb, it could be about many things, like maybe not signalling when you're supposed to. Rarely do I see them let you do the same small fault more than 5 times though before it becomes a serious fault. Can you use your reversing camera or parking sensors during the driving test?
Yes, you can use them, but it's important to rely on them entirely. The examiner will still want to see that you can check your mirrors and your blind spots, and that you're aware of your surroundings. So they're definitely helpful, but you want to show that you can do it the old-fashioned way as well.
Can you use automatic parking?
You can use automatic parking systems during the test, but you still need to show that you can physically control the car and be aware of your surroundings. The examiner will be looking to see that you can still do it manually if needed. So it's a good aid, but not a complete replacement.
Well, yes, you can use parking sensors and you can use the camera. I was impressed that I fluffed my words there when I was saying automatic, but it didn't seem to fluster her. She still carried on. She seems to be understanding me most of the time, but no, you cannot use auto parking systems during your driving test. Maybe she got the wrong end of the stick and she doesn't know what I mean by auto parking systems. Let's see what she means. Let's see what she thinks I mean. What do you think I mean by automatic parking systems?
I think you're referring to those systems in modern cars that can help you parallel park or reverse park. automatically. They basically steer the car into the parking space for you, and they handle a lot of the maneuvering. It's definitely a cool tech feature.
And you think it's okay to use one of those features on the driving test in Great Britain?
In Great Britain, you can use those features during the test, but the examiner will still want to see that you can do it manually as well. So it's definitely helpful, but you should be prepared to show your own skills too.
And you should definitely be prepared to show your own skills, because if you went to use the automatic parking feature in a car, well, that's not going to be allowed on tests. The examiner's not going to accept that. If you can't do it yourself, then you will not pass the test. Do you fail the driving test for dry steering? Dry steering is when you move the steering wheel when the car is stationary.
So dry steering isn't an automatic fail, but it is something that examiners do keep an eye on. It's generally discouraged because it can cause unnecessary wear on the tyres and the steering mechanism. So it's best to avoid it and try to keep the car rolling slightly if you need to turn the wheel.
Would you get a driving fault for dry steering during the driving test?
You might get a minor fault for dry steering, especially if it happens frequently, because it does show a lack of control or awareness. So it's always a good idea to keep the car moving slightly if you need to turn the wheel. Just a small thing to keep in mind.
In over 16 years of teaching people to drive, I've never seen someone get a minor driving fault for dry steering, so that isn't correct. Right, what's the next one? Is using the wrong lane at a roundabout a driving test fail?
Using the wrong lane at a roundabout can definitely lead to a serious fault, especially if it causes confusion or affects the safety of other road users. So it's definitely important to approach roundabouts carefully and be in the correct lane. So definitely something to be mindful of during the test.
If you were to use the incorrect lane on approach to the roundabout, but then were to change to the correct lane during the roundabout, would that be a driving test fail?
It could still be considered a serious fault because it might cause confusion for other road users, or it could be seen as a lack of observation and planning. So it's always best to get into the right lane as early as possible and avoid any lane changes that could be risky. So definitely something to be careful with.
Well, what can I do if I am in the wrong lane when I approach the roundabout?
If you realise you're in the wrong lane, the best thing to do is to stay calm and make sure that you change lanes safely, and only if it's safe to do so. If you can't change lanes safely, it's always better to just go around the roundabout again if you need to, other than making any sudden or unsafe moves. Just always prioritise safety, and the examiner will appreciate that.
Is going the wrong way at a junction a driving test fail?
Yes, going the wrong way at a junction is definitely considered a serious fault and would likely result in a fail because it can be dangerous and it affects the safety of everyone on the road. So it's always important to double check your direction before you turn.
So if I'm approaching a roundabout and I find myself to be in the wrong lane, I'm not allowed to go in the direction of that lane. I still have to go where the examiner has asked me to go.
Exactly, you've got it. The examiner will give you a specific direction, and it's important to follow that instruction. If you find yourself in the wrong lane, the safest thing to do is to still follow the instruction, even if it means going around the roundabout again. Safety and correct lane usage are super important during the test.
She keeps having these pauses where I think she's stopped talking, but she hasn't, and she carries on, which I find a little bit challenging. Well, she's got that one wrong. She's sort of right in a way. Yes, if you use the wrong lane at a junction, that's likely going to be a serious fault, including a roundabout, if you're using the wrong lane at a roundabout. And if you were to change lane during the roundabout to the correct lane, that could be a serious fault, but it depends how you do it. If you did it safely, no, that's fine. But where she's got it majorly wrong is she was saying that you need to go the way that the examiner said. Going the wrong way would be a driving test fail, but actually the advice is, if you find yourself in the wrong lane at a junction and it's not easy to change to the correct lane to go in the direction the examiner is asking you to go in, then you should go the way the lane is taking you, the wrong way. So if you're in a left only lane and the examiner has asked you to go straight and it's not safe for you to move to the lane to go straight, stick to that left only lane and just go left. Is it illegal to stop on double yellow lines to let a passenger into or out of your vehicle?
Generally, double yellow lines mean that you can't stop at all, but there are a few exceptions. If you're stopping very briefly to let a passenger in or out and it's safe to do so, it can be allowed, but it really depends on the specific situation and local regulations. So it's always best to be cautious and just double check the signs.
So can you clarify, am I allowed to stop on double yellow lines to let a passenger into or out of a vehicle? Is that against the law or is that legal?
It can be a bit of a grey area, but generally, stopping on double yellow lines is not allowed. However, in some cases, a very brief stop to let a passenger in or out might be tolerated if it's completely safe and very short, but it's always best to avoid it if possible, just to make sure you stay on the safe side of the law.
She's sort of right. What she's saying is not untrue, but the way she's saying it doesn't make it clear enough. You are allowed to stop on yellow lines to let people into or out of your vehicle. She's saying it's a grey area. She's saying you should do it as briefly as possible. Yes, that's true, but it's quite clear cut. It's either no, you're not allowed, or yes, you are allowed. And she's kind of muddying the water there. So yes, yellow lines, you can stop on them as long as it's safe to let people in and out of the vehicle. And I say as long as it's safe, but everything you do in driving is as long as it's safe, so there's no difference there. Should we move on to the next question? What we got for her now? I keep saying her, well, she's got a female voice, hasn't she? Although she's not alive. Aha, yeah, this one. I like this one. How often do you have to check your mirrors to pass the driving test?
You generally want to check your mirrors regularly and at key points, like before you change direction, before you change speed, and when you're approaching hazards. There's no strict number of times, but the key is to do it consistently and at the right moments, where you show that you're aware of your surroundings and you stay safe on the road.
Is it true that you have to check your mirrors every set number of seconds to pass?
It is not exactly a strict number of seconds, but the idea is to check your mirrors frequently enough to stay aware of your surroundings. Usually it's recommended every 5 to 8 seconds, and definitely before any significant manoeuvre like turning or changing lanes. The main thing is just to be consistent and aware.
Who says you need to check your mirrors every 5 to 8 seconds?
That recommendation comes from general driving best practices and guidance from various driving schools and instructors. It's not a strict rule, but it's a good general guideline to help ensure that you remain aware of what's going on around you while you drive. It's all about safety and staying mindful on the road.
Okay, I can't really argue with that answer. There is no set number of seconds you need to check your mirrors. You need to check your mirrors when you need to, like she said, when you need to change lane or if you're approaching a hazard, when you need to be aware of your surroundings. Now, yes, you do hear a lot of instructors say check them every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds, whatever that their number is, but that is not a requirement. And she's quoting, obviously, what she has found online somewhere. Well, I've just had a break because my camera was overheating, but let's get back to it, shall we? Next question, about the handbrake. Do I have to use the handbrake, or parking brake as it's also known, when driving in the driving test if I am waiting or if a pause becomes a wait?
In general, it's a good practice to use the handbrake whenever you anticipate a longer pause, just to keep the car stable and show that you're in full control.
But do I
it definitely helps
have
with
to?
safety.
Do I have to pass the driving test? Would it be a fail if I didn't?
So it's not an absolute requirement that will cause an automatic fail if you don't use the handbrake, but it is definitely recommended if you don't use it and it affects safety or control, then it could lead to a minor fault. So it's just a good habit to get into, and it shows that you're conscientious.
Okay, so you got that right. You don't have to use your handbrake when you are waiting during the driving test. You need to use it when you're parking. I interrupted her there, and that's because I am already starting to get a little bit tired of talking to her, because she has this way of ending her part of the conversation, which is a little bit drawn out, and I've kind of got the point now, and I feel like I've got to wait for this until you, and then she goes up higher pitch at the end, like that. So it's not a pleasant experience talking to this AI, although I am still incredibly amazed that I am chatting to my phone and it's giving me, it's understanding me, and she's making sense. Even though she's not always right and a little bit annoying, she is making sense. Shall we move on to the next question? Coasting. If I was to coast during the driving test, would that be a driving test fail?
Coasting, which means taking your foot off the clutch in a manual car or not being in the proper gear, can definitely be a concern because it reduces your control over the car. So if the examiner notices that and it affects your ability to control the vehicle safely, it could definitely lead to a minor or even a serious fault. So it's best to keep the car in gear and stay in full control.
That's what I mean. She kind of just goes on a little bit afterwards. Maybe I do that, but I don't know. I have more patience with people, I think, than I do with computers. Well, she got that one completely wrong, didn't she? She said about coming off the clutch or being in the incorrect gear. Well, coasting is actually holding the clutch down to disconnect the engine from the wheels, or being in neutral with the clutch up. So she didn't really get that right, although she did say it could be a fault. Depends on what happens. And yes, coasting can be a driving fault on the driving test, and it can lead to a fail, but not necessarily. It depends if you maintained good control of the car. During the driving test, it always comes down to, were you safe and were you legal? And if an examiner is going to fail you, it must be because you were either being unsafe or illegal. Next question then, shall we? Where are we? Oh, this one, yep, here we go. Do driving examiners need to fail a set percentage of people every week?
That's an interesting question. Driving examiners don't have a quota that they need to meet. They assess each candidate fairly based on their performance. The goal is really to ensure that everyone who passes is fully ready and safe to drive. So it's all about fairness and safety.
Why do so many people believe that driving examiners have a set quota of how many people they are allowed to pass?
Yeah, it's a pretty common misconception, I think, because sometimes people must feel that the process is a bit mysterious, and it can seem like there's a bit of a challenge in passing, but really the main focus is on ensuring that the person is competent and safe. So it's all about fairness, even though it might not always feel that way.
Well, she got that one right. I've got to be quick now because there's only 15 minutes left. Driving examiners in Great Britain don't have a quota, but the DVSA monitor examiners based on their pass rate. So there may be a pressure for an individual examiner to try and keep the pass rate within the normal zone for the area, because let's say in zone A the pass rate is 45% and there's an examiner with a pass rate of 65%. Well, the DVSA are going to look at that and go, why are they so different? What are they doing different? And that examiner is more likely to be monitored or investigated as a result. So yes, there is no quota, but examiners may feel pressured to keep their pass rate within the normal zone. That's just how humans work. Even though there's no set quota, maybe someone will try and keep their percentage in that normal zone where they're not going to be investigated. Shall we do the next question, because I'm repeating myself now? Will you fail the driving test for driving on a mini roundabout?
Driving over a mini roundabout isn't an automatic fail, but it can lead to a minor fault if it suggests that you're not giving it the proper attention, or if it affects safety. The key is to treat it like a proper roundabout, give way to traffic as needed, and make sure you navigate it safely. So just keep your awareness up and you'll be good.
Yes, driving on a mini roundabout could be a minor mark. It could also be a serious mark depending on how badly you drove over it and how easy it was to go around it. You must go round mini roundabouts, but if there's not enough room, you can go over it as much as you need to do the junction, but you shouldn't do more than you need to or grossly more than you need to, and you certainly shouldn't disregard it and just drive straight over the whole thing without any effort of going around it at all. Let's get to the next question before I run out of time.
No worries at all. I'm here whenever you need me, so if you had any more questions or just want to chat.
Yeah, I unmuted you when I was still talking. I'll ask my question now. If you stall a manual car, will you fail the driving test?
Stalling a manual car during the driving test isn't an automatic fail, but it can definitely lead to a minor fault, especially if it disrupts the flow of traffic or causes any safety concerns. So it's always good to try to avoid stalling. But if it happens once and you handle it safely, you can still pass.
Should you check your mirrors before the emergency stop?
Absolutely. It's always a good idea to check your mirrors before you do any manoeuvre, including an emergency stop, just to make sure it's safe and that no one is behind you. So that little mirror check definitely helps keep everything safe and smooth.
No, you shouldn't check your mirrors before the emergency stop. The whole point in the emergency stop is that it's supposed to be an emergency. The examiner will check behind and make sure it's safe. And when they put their hand out and say stop, you need to stop as quickly as possible. If you were to check your mirrors and start stopping a little bit later as a result, then you may not pass the driving test. You'll be trained that when you do your driving lessons with your driving instructor. Your instructor should tell you, don't check your mirrors, I'll make sure it's safe. That's the same as what's going to happen on the driving test. Just do the stop as quick as you can. Next one. Are you more likely to pass the driving test in an automatic car or a manual car? Or actually, I'll rephrase that question because it depends on the driver. What driving test has a higher pass rate, automatic or manual?
In the UK, manual driving tests tend to have a harder pass rate than automatic ones. The difference is usually a few percentage points, with manual tests having a slightly higher pass rate. It does depend on the individual, but that's the general trend.
That's true, the manual driving test does have a higher pass rate. So I found ChatGPT, and this is the first time I've ever used it. I found it very impressive. The way it listens to me, understands what I'm saying, and then talks to me with sense. Although a little bit monotonous to listen to because there is this pattern that happens every time she talks with that sort of higher pitch thing at the end and repeating herself a little bit at the end. Maybe I do that as well, actually. I think maybe I do, but I just found it a bit of a chore talking to her. But she did get quite a few things wrong, quite a bit wrong. So it's not there yet where we can ask it questions and trust it about what we should and shouldn't do and what is legal and what is illegal, because it gets things wrong. You still need advice from a professional. If you found the video interesting, please give it a thumbs up. If you're looking for car insurance, check out the links to Collingwood and Confused in the description. If you're learning to drive and want to insure yourself on somebody else's car, then Collingwood are there for you, because you can do so without affecting the owner's policy. And that takes away a big stress from the owner of that car that you're using to practice your driving in. Via the link at the moment, there's up to 35% off and a £20 gift card. If you want to insure your own car, I recommend checking out the link to confused.com, because you fill out one quote form and get loads of quotes back from many insurers to compare who's cheapest, and you can change your car on that quote as many times as you like without having to do the whole quote again, which makes it a quick and easy way to compare how much it costs to insure different cars. Just change the car on the quote and recalculate, and there's your price. Using the links doesn't cost you anything, but it does support the channel, so thank you very much. Subscribe to get my future videos, and until the next one, cheerio.